Hello Pirzat. In this short screencast, I'm going to give you feedback to your summary from last week. So let's begin. First of all, overall, very good structure. You start with a clear first sentence. You include the name of the speaker, the title of the video, a good reporting verb. You've stated the main idea argumentatively. That's good. In the main body, you followed basically what the speaker was saying. 3 characteristics, you discuss those. And then you talk about the three reasons, as you call them. Now, I would say it's a little bit imbalanced because the characteristics take, look at how much they take, right? But the reasons only take a little bit, you see? So I would say you definitely need to expand on this. So expand, because he did spend quite a bit of time in the video giving these 3 recommendations. He calls them reasons, but they're really recommendations. Now, how can you make this section better? Well, first of all, instead of these numbers, you can just use linking words. First, second, third, or first, second, thirdly, first, secondly, thirdly, or additionally, furthermore, something like that. Or a third reason or a third recommendation given by Hockett, or the speaker goes on to give 3 recommendations, like that. You could use linking words, because this, in written style, we don't usually include numbers like that. This would be good for notes, but for the final summary, for the paragraph, you should not include these numbers. But that's not such a big problem. I think the bigger issue here is that you just haven't explained enough what these recommendations are. So, especially the second and the third one. Predictive and preventive, what does that mean? These are just 2 adjectives. He does mention them, but what does that mean? Who is predictive and preventive? What is predictive and preventive, right? So you definitely need to explain that a little bit more. So here you could say a really cool linking phrase would be, if you want to link the 2 halves of the lecture, you could say, having explained the 3, or having discussed the 3 characteristics of implicit biases, Hockett goes on to offer 3 recommendations. Firstly, we need, and then you would say all of these 3 recommendations, you would rephrase them using your own words. Because right now what you've done, you've just copied the wording from the video, and that might be considered plagiarism. So another thing to do is, it would be good to avoid plagiarism, rephrase using your own words, right? And you can just say what each of the recommendations means. So the first one was, we need to diagnose the problem. We need to become aware of our own biases. So it's kind of a metaphor here, the diagnosis of the problem. He's saying it's like a disease. In order to heal ourselves, we need to first diagnose the problem. We need to know what the problem is. We need to become aware of these biases, right? So you could say firstly, we need to become aware of our own biases through a clear diagnosis of the problem. You see? That would be more of a paraphrase in your own words. And you really need to work on these 2. Right? Secondly, Hockett recommends that and what is predictive and preventive? He's talking about how we need to engage in predictive and preventive behavior towards biases. Or you could say the approach our approach to biases needs to be predictive and preventive. But I wouldn't use these two adjectives because that's directly taken from him. I would just rephrase it. So what does that mean, to be predictive and preventive? What he's saying was we need to be able to predict, are we likely to experience biases in a certain situation? And if we think we are, we need to do our best to try and avoid these biases, something like that, right? That's more clear. In other words, our behavior should be predictive. And here as well, he does say reduce shame. But in your own words, you can say, what's the recommendation? Thirdly, or a final recommendation mentioned by Hockett is that, or Hockett also recommends, or finally Hockett recommends that we, what is this reduce shame? What he's talking about is we need to openly discuss our own biases without feeling guilty, in an open discussion, without feeling ashamed of our own biases. We need to be honest and open about them. That's what he's saying, right? So you can definitely paraphrase in your own words here. In conclusion, he proves that if consciously avoid this bias, okay, here you're missing a verb, a subject, a person. If we consciously, right? So missing subject, the subject of the sentence, meaning if we consciously avoid biases, I think plural would be better because he's talking about biases in more generally, right? If we consciously avoid biases, we can, again, you're repeating his words. You don't really need to do that because remember, you're trying to avoid plagiarism, so you can rephrase. You can just rephrase the whole thing in your own words. You can say something about how if we start working on ourselves first, if we start working from the inside, we get very serious about our own biases, we can help change society in a positive way or something like that, right? But overall, I would say the structure of this summary is quite good. Now let's look at in a little bit more detail at the first half. In order to define bias, the speaker, that's a very good linking phrase. We usually use the present, remember? The speaker lists present tense. The speaker lists 3 characteristics of implicit biases. Again, you want to use the plural. Okay. Now, what you've done here, you've basically quoted from the lecture and then explain your own words. I'm not very sure about this because, first of all, the quotations are incomplete. Who operates at the subconscious level? Who runs contrary to? And then rapid. See, it's kind of incomplete quotation, right? He did say that these biases are triggered by rapid and automatic associations. That's fine, but I think you're better off. You can use that term. Unlike these words here, predictive, reduce shame, all these other egalitarian behavior, these are not terms. That's just his wording. So you can easily rephrase that. Unlike that, you are allowed to repeat the key terms like implicit bias, right? Mental associations, automatic. You are allowed to use those, so you don't need to quote. But I think the rest should be in your own words. So I would say instead of quote and then which means that we cannot realize that we have, you can just say that. We can just say that these biases operate, these biases, here you want to, so you don't repeat the wording. I know it's difficult to paraphrase, but you should make an effort, right? These biases are subconscious, which means that we cannot realize that we're not always aware of them, something like that. You see, you don't have to repeat his exact words. Secondly, the second characteristic mentioned by Hockett, or Hockett mentions that these biases are sometimes in contradiction with our own conscious beliefs. So you can repeat this one, this part, because it's a kind of a term, but then you should rephrase the rest, you see? Now remember, the speaker gives examples to describe how biases are contrary to our conscious thinking. I'm not sure that that's the example. Do you mean that game he played with the audience? I think a better way is just staying away from these examples here. Just don't even mention them. Just focus on the supporting idea. I think that's the best way to do that. Focus on the supporting idea. Just say, secondly, Hockett explains that implicit biases are often in contradiction with our own conscious beliefs. That's it. Thirdly, as Hockett explains, biases are triggered by or based on automatic mental associations, blah blah blah, you know, you can explain. And again here, okay, this is the game. The speaker interacts with the audience to prove the existence. Yeah, I'm not sure that you need that. That really does not add much. It's not really a supporting idea, that game. So you don't need to mention that game. Basically, mentioning the audience is usually not necessary in a summary like this. We just want to focus on the supporting ideas, right? So thirdly, as Hockett explains, implicit biases are triggered by or based on rapid or quick automatic associations, which blah blah blah. You know, you obviously can explain a little bit, but I think it's not a good idea to use quote, comma, and then explanation. Not in this way, anyways. But again, overall, this is a well-structured summary, so I would say avoid the speaker's wording, because that's also, we need to avoid plagiarism, and you should be fine. Expand on this section, and I think that will be a very good summary. Okay, I hope this is helpful, Pirzat. Good luck.